He could have the basketball god willingly play the substitute. Yet he's questioned for lowering the standard of the Hall of Fame. Possessing a talent that the Black Mamba envied, yet always unable to break the first-round curse. Transforming from ordinary to a world master requires 10,000 hours of honing. But Van Gundy claims T-Mac only spent 500 hours, making some deem him an unparalleled prodigy, while others consider him a lazy man with no ambition. T-Mac didn't become the Jordan of Space City, but his story still teaches us how to embrace mediocrity. In 1993, T-Mac, 14 years old, was a promising young baseball player, only to temporarily switch to professional basketball because of the influence of Penny Hardaway's superb skills. Though he had passed the prime age of 12 to become a basketball genius, timing is a so-called golden period for a true genius. Only after being pushed to the bench for 2 years by his conservative high school coach did the senior T-Mac manage to score an average of 23 points and 12 rebounds per game, securing him the last spot in Adidas training, where he hit the button to change his fate. Initially, no one paid attention to this obscure player in the 175th position, but when he left boot camp, T-Mac had become the #1 high school student in America. Henceforth, #1 became his moniker. In the 1997 draft, Raptors president Isaiah Thomas signed him with the 9th pick. The Bulls general manager, Krause, proposed a Pippen for McGrady trade. If it hadn't been for Jordan putting a stop to it, Chicago might not have had to wait for Rose's arrival to swiftly rebuild after Jordan's retirement. Having migrated from sunny Florida to snowy Beijing, what troubled T-Mac was not only Toronto's heavy snowfall, but also Coach Donald Walker's overbearingness. Due to his congenital scoliosis, the experienced coach determined, "You won't last 3 seasons in the NBA." Under his command, the Raptors got a record of a devastating 16-66, with T-Mac languishing on the bench, waving his towel in frustration, endlessly struggling with the helplessness of his dreams running counter. Not until one sunny afternoon, when the smiling assassin fired Walker with a smile, and Butch Carter took over the reins, did T-Mac regain his soaring hopes. Only, just 49 games later, T-Mac declared the season over due to a back injury. That curse from destiny seemed to have sentenced him to death at that moment. The cheers meant for him were now all given to Carter, who had just joined the team in the 99-00 season. Bouncing back, T-Mac scored an average of 15.4 points, 6.3 rebounds per game, and delivered the 6th highest number of blocks in the league, helping the Raptors make it to the playoffs for the first time. It was in this bloody battle with the New York Knicks that Carter, who usually danced in the sky and roamed the earth, got stuck in the mire, a mere 15 hits out of 50 shots in 3 games. In contrast, T-Mac's stop-jump shots became the most reliable weapon for the Raptors. Tasting the flavor of the playoffs for the first time that summer, he received an olive branch from his hometown team, and a beautiful blueprint to team up with Grant Hill and Tim Duncan. Sadly, when T-Mac personally severed ties with Carter, the Magic couldn't bring in Duncan from San Antonio, and Grant Hill became fragile due to his worsening ankle injury. Leaving the snowy Toronto, T-Mac's time in Orlando seemed even lonelier. However, after receiving his idol Hardaway's jersey, he also inherited Hill's fastest first step in history. Coupled with his mind-blowing fadeaway jumper, an unstoppable scoring machine was unearthed, swearing to stir up the entire league. After being given unlimited shooting rights, T-Mac evolved from a defensive wing to an unstoppable offensive weapon. That season, T-Mac scored over 25 points in 9 consecutive games, scored more than 30 points in 26 games, averaging 26.8 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 4.6 assists per game for the season, helping the Magic return to the postseason as the 7th seed in the East, becoming the first player after Jordan and O'Neal to average 26 points before turning 21. Hence, he won the season's Most Improved Player award. In the playoff series against the Bucks' 3 sharpshooters, McGrady, who just woke up, personally stirred up a bloody storm, scoring 33 points, 9 rebounds, and 8 assists in the first 2 games, and 35 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists in the others. Unfortunately, despite the overall skill disparity, the Magic had no chance of winning. So the 3rd game was back in Orlando. T-Mac descended like a war god, scoring a crazy 42 points, 8 rebounds, and 10 assists, leading Orlando to a hard-won victory. Unfortunately, the 2001 playoffs were not meant for McGrady. When Carter successfully took revenge against the Knicks at Madison Square Garden, when Iverson, covered in scars, pierced the Lakers' unbeaten run, when Kobe lifted his 2nd championship trophy, McGrady, who was knocked out in the first round, even though he had entered the ranks of super scorers, was still overshadowed by the other 3 scoring guards. Thankfully, a pearl does not gather dust. As the curtain slowly rose on the 02-03 season, the great Jordan was entering his final season. As a young 23-year-old, T-Mac began to unleash his talents without restraint. NBA never lacks scoring madness. But with the birth of the bad boys, the league's average score started to drop sharply since the 90s. The first 5 seasons of the new century were particularly brutal. Taking the Pistons and Pacers from the East as an example, they often restricted their opponents to less than 70 points at the drop of a hat. So in that era, players who could score over 25 points per game, even in the small ball era, possessed the ability to change a match single-handedly. That season, T-Mac's average score reached the terrifying level of 32.1 points. Hence, that dark series took place. On April 20, 2003, T-Mac scored an impressive 43 points in Detroit, giving the Magic their opening playoff victory. 3 days later, he scored another 46 points. With his godly performance, T-Mac, even against the odds, dragged the dysfunctional Magic in the first round of the playoffs, pushing the top-seeded Pistons to a 1-3 deficit. If it was not for the NBA rule change in 2003, this would have been yet another monumental upset. Sadly, it ended up being the start of T-Mac's first-round curse. From the 5th game of the series, the Pistons started their bad boys bloodline awakening. Coupled with the passive trigger of Reeves' Law, T-Mac could not continue his incredible run. He could only watch helplessly as the Magic lost 3 games in a row, watching the rookie Gooden hold up the inside. And Hill, who had been brought to the operating table time and again, T-Mac desperately wished for some help. When Duncan that year led the Spurs to their second FMVP, Orlando completely lost the chance to bring in that superstar. In the 03-04 season, Magic spent a fortune bringing in Juwan Howard, as well as Tyronn Lue. It wasn't so much a roster reinforcement, as it was the last straw that broke T-Mac's back. As the team moved further from the playoffs, T-Mac openly expressed that apart from retaining his scoring champion title, he was no longer concerned about the team's record. Thus, his glorious years in Orlando also began to count down, and a heavy trade initiated by Houston was about to shock the entire league. The main reason the Rockets wanted T-Mac was due to the conflict between Van Gundy and Francis. Van Gundy was a disciple of Pat Riley, believing in exhaustive training and mechanical tactics as the foundation. Accustomed to open-style offense, Francis partnered with Yao Ming. Together put pressure on the management to fire the bald-headed coach. Finally, the Rockets sent Francis, Mobley, and Kevin Cato, securing the 2-time scoring champion T-Mac and Tyronn Lue, also inheriting the big contracts of Uncle Hua. Chinese fans initially didn't understand this decision. They were unwilling to let go of the loyal Francis, and due to the Magic's broadcast schedule far behind that of the Lakers, people were quite unfamiliar with this drowsy swingman. Why could he be compared with Kobe? But T-Mac only needed 35 seconds to answer this question. After the game, the victim Popovich said, "You watched him rule everything, yet you could only stand there helplessly." Even Duncan frankly said, T-Mac was the only MVP candidate, with this miracle progressively rising throughout the league. Big Gossip Garnett stated, "I can guard Jordan, but I would rather retire on the spot than face T-Mac." Later, Magic Johnson and Bird also joined the group chat. For a while, T-Mac was elevated to the best in history. Even the Rockets' all-time greatest player who had been in retirement for years, Olajuwon, couldn't keep silent. "I may not be qualified to rate T-Mac. Better think of a way to catch up with Jordan first." Who would have thought that this earth-shattering 35 seconds had already exhausted T-Mac's life's worth of luck? At the start, the Rockets were standing tall as the third in the West, and the Magic also stepped into the playoff ranks. Experts claimed it was a win-win trade. Yet, as time passed, people began to realize that this might be a lose-lose decision. In the first round of the playoffs in 2005, the Rockets, relying on the pick-and-roll combination of Yao Ming and T-Mac, consecutively took 2 home courts from the Mavericks. Outsiders were predicting they would sweep to the next round. But with Mark Cuban putting pressure on the league's higher-ups, the Rockets' Achilles heel was imperceptibly laid bare. Next, at their home court in Houston, Yao Ming was constantly plagued with foul troubles due to biased refereeing. The Mavericks took the opportunity to chase the big score to 2-2. And the decisive battle at the Kings Mountain, Finley's out-of-bounds steal, even made Yao Ming's 30 points in one game nothing but empty talk. Despite T-Mac's performance in the 6th game, with 37 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 steals, the Rockets managed to catch up the big score to 3-3. Once the highly anticipated Game 7 kicked off, character players from the Space City were placed under fire, eventually leading to a heartbreaking defeat. In this battle, T-Mac scored 27 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 blocks. Yao Ming had 33 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 blocks. But other players only scored a total of 16 points. Starting point guard, Bobby Sura, didn't score at all. After the game, T-Mac shed tears of disappointment, giving his all time and time again, only to end up in repeated major disappointments. As the leader of the team, T-Mac began to be branded as lacking in fighting spirit. Even his exclusive talent became a point of attack for his laziness. But the two most famous lies in the NBA. One is that Kobe has no talent. The other is that T-Mac does not work hard. Compared to Francis, who dropped off rapidly after leaving the Rockets, T-Mac and Van Gundy maintained a reasonably good relationship. Even though Van Gundy once stated, T-Mac became a master with just 500 hours of work. Even if he eventually left the Rockets discordantly, we cannot deny that during the 4 years Yao Ming was pushed onto the operating table 6 times. It was T-Mac who was leading the team alone for a long time. In the 07-08 season, the Rockets coach changed from Van Gundy to Adelman. The team's record in the early stage of the season hovered around 50%. A depressing atmosphere began to spread in the team. Hayes even publicly questioned the team's strategy. "I don't know who to pass the ball to in the attack." In the face of the crisis, T-Mac began to act as a forward. Even when Yao Ming was injured halfway, he created the incredible 22-game winning streak. From the 10th in the West all the way up to the 1st. In that fiercely contested Wild West. The value of this is self-evident. It was at this time that the management got the illusion of recapturing the championship. But how far could the Rockets go without Yao Ming? In the playoffs to fight against old nemesis the Jazz, Darren Williams and Boozer formed the new Utah double threat. Add Kirilenko and Oker to the team. Their lineup can be said to be a nemesis of the Rockets. 4 games later, the Jazz took the game point 3-1. At this time, T-Mac, troubled by back and knee injuries, was unwilling to bow to fate. He launched the final charge with 6 shots of painkiller. And at the dimly lit 6th station, time and time again, he bravely dunked under the basket. In this battle, he scored 40 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. He continued to do so until he exhausted his final peak. In the days that followed, his number changed from 1 to 3. Transferred to Atlanta and Detroit. Only the remnants of a white horse long gun were left in the corroding wind and rain. As time passed, he was no longer able to dominate as before. In the 2013 NBA Finals, before Ray Allen hit that era-defining three-pointer, T-Mac on the bench had already buried his head into the towel. The man who once dominated everything could now only entrust his fate to others. Years later, young people would ask what else T-Mac had, apart from those 13 points in 35 seconds. But who else in this world, other than T-Mac, has had 13 points in 35 seconds? Not all geniuses can stand on the peak of their era. Our drifting half-life is nothing more than to capture those few moments when life stands still. Like that rocket man soaring into the clouds, having dropped the sixpence in his hand, venturing into endless storms, all for that eternal moon in his heart.